For centuries, archaeologists believed they understood what the ground was hiding. But every so often, the earth reveals something far more disturbing. Objects appear in places where history says they should not exist. Bodies surface that seem impossibly preserved. Entire structures emerge where no one ever believed people had lived. And when these discoveries finally come into the light, even seasoned archaeologists are left staring in disbelief, struggling to explain what they have just uncovered. The man who slept underground for 2,300 years. In May 1950, two brothers were cutting peat in a swampy wetland in rural Denmark when their tools hit something soft. They looked down and saw a human face staring back at them. The skin was dark and leathery, but the features were clear. The cheekbones, the closed eyes. The expression on his face was so peaceful, it was disturbing. He did not look dead. He looked like a man who had simply decided to lie down in the mud and close his eyes. The brothers did what anyone would do. They called the police. Officers arrived and immediately treated it as a fresh murder case. The body was too intact, too detailed, too present to be anything else. And when they saw the leather strap pulled tight around his neck, the knot still fully formed, it looked exactly like a crime scene. Then the archaeologists arrived, carbon dating was performed, and the results made everyone step back. This man had been lying in that wetland for over 2,300 years. The acidic water saturating the ground, combined with a natural moss called sphagnum that lined the wetland floor, had preserved him at a level that science still finds remarkable. Every wrinkle on his face, every pore, the stubble along his jaw. His stomach contents were still intact, showing his last meal was a thin porridge of seeds and grains, eaten somewhere between 12 and 24 hours before he died. He was not a murder victim. Researchers believe he was a ritual sacrifice, deliberately offered to something that ancient people feared or worshipped deeply. Nobody knows what that ritual was. Nobody knows what they believed they were buying with his life. And that wetland kept him preserved long enough to make sure we would have to sit with that question forever. The underground city built to swallow 60,000 people. In 2020, archaeologists surveying the ancient town of Midyat in Turkey noticed a small cave opening hidden beneath the floor of an ordinary stone house. Most people would have walked past it. This team did not. They went in. The cave opened into a corridor. That corridor connected to another, then another. The further the team pushed underground, the larger the world beneath their feet became. Carved living spaces lined the walls. Storage chambers had been cut directly into the rock. Ventilation shafts ran upward toward the surface. There were rooms that appeared to have been used for religious gatherings, and scattered across the floors were ancient tools left behind exactly where someone had last set them down. This was not a cave. This was a city. Researchers dated the construction to nearly 2,000 years ago, during a period when Roman authorities were actively hunting Christians and Jews across the region. Experts believe entire communities built this place so they could vanish completely. They would seal the entrances, descend underground, and wait while soldiers searched the streets above them. Up to 60,000 people could have been sheltered here at once, eating, sleeping, praying, and burying their dead without ever surfacing. Then came the detail that stopped everyone cold. Archaeologists estimate they have only uncovered 5% of the structure. The remaining 95% is still down there, sealed, dark, and completely unexplored. The monster hidden beneath a backyard. A homeowner in Pombal, Portugal, was doing what people do every day. He had construction work to carry out on his property, and workers began digging into the ground. Their tools hit something solid. They cleared around it and hit another. Then they uncovered something that curved in a way no rock ever does. Paleontologists were called in. Within hours, the mood on the site changed completely. The bones belonged to a sauropod, one of the largest animals to ever walk on this planet. As the excavation widened, the skeleton kept going. The team measured it at 82 feet from end to end and estimated it stood nearly 40 feet tall. Some individual bones were more than 10 feet long. What stunned the scientists even further was that many of the ribs were still locked in their original position inside the earth, exactly as they had been in life. That level of preservation is almost unheard of in dinosaur recovery. The scientists on site grew noticeably quieter as the full scale became clear. This could be the largest dinosaur skeleton ever found in Europe, buried under an ordinary man's backyard for over 150 million years, perfectly arranged, completely undisturbed, as if it simply lay down one day and never got up. The sea dragon that crawled out of the mud. In 2021, conservationist Joe Davis and his team in England's Midlands began draining a reservoir lagoon. It was routine maintenance, the kind of job that gets done quietly, with no expectation of anything unusual. But as the water level dropped and the mud beneath began to surface, something appeared that stopped everyone in their tracks. Shapes, long, dark, and unmistakably structured. The workers moved closer and realized they were looking at bones. Massive bones, running in a line far longer than any animal they had ever seen up close. Scientists were called in and identified the creature as an ichthyosaur, an ancient ocean predator that ruled the seas more than 180 million years ago. If you have never heard of an ichthyosaur, picture something built like a dolphin, but designed purely to hunt. Powerful, fast, and equipped with jaws built to crush whatever it caught. This one measured roughly 32 feet in length. What made it even more extraordinary was the condition it was in. Soft tissue impressions were still visible along parts of the skeleton, making it one of the most complete ichthyosaur fossils ever found in the United Kingdom. Joe Davis later described it as the most significant find of his entire career. But the detail that unsettled the research team most was not the size or the preservation. It was the landscape around them. Flat, quiet, ordinary English countryside stretching in every direction. Because every inch of that land was once the floor of an ancient sea, and this creature had been lying beneath it the entire time. The parking lot that was hiding an entire cemetery. Construction crews in Philadelphia were preparing ground for a new apartment complex when a worker's tool hit something unexpected a few feet below the surface. It was not rock, it was not debris, it was bone. Work stopped immediately. Archaeologists were brought in, and then the count began. Beneath the pavement, arranged in neat rows, were 38 wooden coffins. The remains were traced back to the First Baptist Church Cemetery, which had been established in the early 1700s. Historical records confirmed the cemetery had been officially relocated in the 1800s. Every body was supposed to have been moved. Many of them never were. They were simply paved over and forgotten beneath decades of asphalt and daily foot traffic. When archaeologists examined the coffins more closely, they found inscriptions carved into the wood in multiple languages, including English, Latin, and Hebrew, suggesting the burial ground had served people from different communities and backgrounds. That alone was unexpected. But what genuinely disturbed the researchers came next. Several coffins had cracked under the weight of the ground pressing down on them for over a century. Inside those cracked coffins, the bones had shifted into unnatural positions. The archaeologists on site had seen a great deal in their careers. But the sight of those collapsed coffins, the multilingual inscriptions, and the realization that these people had been abandoned beneath a parking lot left the entire team visibly shaken. The woolly mammoth, a farmer almost threw away. A farmer in Michigan was digging a drainage trench on his property when he felt the ground resist in a way that soil simply does not. About 8 feet down, something massive was blocking the path. He assumed it was an old tree stump and called workers over to pull it free. When it finally broke through the surface, nobody said anything for a moment. It was a bone, a single bone, larger than most of the men standing around it. Archaeologists were contacted and arrived within days. What they confirmed stunned everyone. The bone was part of a woolly mammoth skeleton dating back between 12,000 and 15,000 years. As excavation continued, the team recovered parts of the skull, tusks, ribs, and vertebrae. But the discovery that truly changed everything came when researchers examined the bones more closely. There were deliberate cut marks across the skeleton. Clean, methodical, unmistakably intentional. Early humans had been here. They had hunted this mammoth, butchered it carefully, and then submerged the carcass in water to preserve the meat for later use. This was not a random death in a field. This was a food storage operation carried out by people who knew exactly what they were doing. 15,000 years of silence, buried 8 feet beneath an ordinary farm, had been hiding one of the clearest records of early human survival ever found in North America. The Roman artifact that turned experts pale. Excavation workers digging on a quiet farm in Germany pulled up what looked like a large, corroded lump of bronze. It was dirty, misshapen, and gave no immediate indication of what it was. Workers set it aside. It looked like scrap. Then the archaeologists started cleaning it. As the layers of dirt and oxidation were carefully removed, something began to take shape. A curved surface, then structure, then detail. The face of a horse emerged from the bronze, carved with a level of precision that made everyone on site stop what they were doing. This was not scrap. It was part of a colossal Roman statue, and experts identified it almost immediately as belonging to a monument built in honor of Emperor Augustus, one of the most powerful rulers in the entire history of Rome. Dating confirmed the artifact was nearly 2,000 years old, created during the period when Roman armies were pushing violently into Germanic territory. Specialists later valued the artifact at around $1.8 million. But the money was not what silenced the room. Roman monuments of this scale did not end up in open fields. They were erected in conquered cities, in public squares, in places where Rome wanted its presence to feel permanent and unmovable. So the question that nobody could answer was direct and deeply unsettling. How did a piece of one of Rome's most significant monuments end up buried in a German farm, miles from any known Roman settlement, with no record of how it got there? That question has never been fully answered. The bomb that had been ticking beneath a city for 70 years. Construction workers digging beneath downtown Belgrade hit a large metal object several feet underground. Nobody was alarmed. Old European cities are full of buried debris, leftover material from decades of construction and demolition. The workers assumed it was scrap and called for it to be cleared. When experts arrived and got a proper look at the object, the site went quiet. It was a World War II bomb, fully intact, still armed, carrying 1,400 pounds of live explosives inside its casing. The bomb had been dropped during the Allied bombing campaigns of 1944 and had driven itself into the ground without detonating. And there it stayed. For over 70 years, the city of Belgrade grew directly above it. Roads were paved over it, buildings went up around it, water pipes were laid nearby. Thousands of people lived and worked within its blast radius without ever knowing it was there. Had it detonated during the construction work, it would have leveled multiple city blocks. Residents were evacuated immediately. Disposal teams worked through the night to remove it safely. But what unsettled the experts was the implications sitting behind the discovery. Beneath many of Europe's oldest cities, there are dozens of bombs exactly like this one that have never been found. They are still down there right now, underneath streets that people walk every single day. The teenager who found a prehistoric ocean. A teenager in Alabama had a simple hobby. On weekends, he would walk his family's property looking for shark teeth. Nothing serious, just something to do outdoors. On one of those walks, he noticed some unusual bone fragments pushing through the surface of the ground. They were small, weathered, and easy to dismiss. He picked them up anyway and brought them to scientists. That decision changed everything about that afternoon. The fragments belonged to a prehistoric whale, a species that had swum through shallow inland seas covering this region approximately 34 million years ago. Researchers expanded the excavation and recovered part of the jaw and a massive ancient tooth. The more they uncovered, the more significant the site became. Scientists were not just excited about the whale. They were stunned by what its presence confirmed about the land surrounding it. This quiet Alabama property with its hills and fields and tree lines was once entirely underwater. 34 million years ago, prehistoric ocean creatures were crossing directly over the ground where that teenager was standing. He had not gone out looking for anything extraordinary. He had simply picked up a few odd pieces of bone that most people would have ignored. And in doing so, he had uncovered proof of an entire ocean that the land had long forgotten. The ship that shouldn't have been there. Workers digging in Boston's Seaport district were several feet underground when they hit something that was not soil and not stone. It was wood, old wood. They dug around it and the shape kept growing. Archaeologists were brought in, and what came out of the ground was a 50-foot wooden ship, buried and sitting perfectly upright, as if someone had carefully placed it there and walked away. City archaeologist Joe Bagley called it a rare and extraordinary find, the first shipwreck ever discovered in Boston's filled land. The ship dated back to the mid-1800s. Back then, this area was not a busy city district. It was a muddy stretch of open shoreline called the Dorchester Flats, right along the water. Experts believe the ship got caught in a storm, got stuck in the mud, and was eventually stripped of anything worth keeping before being left behind. When Boston started filling in that shoreline to build on, nobody came back for the ship. The ground just swallowed it. Barrels of lime found near the ship suggested it had been carrying goods when the storm hit. Using cutting-edge 3D imaging technology, archaeologists created a complete digital map of the wreck, preserving every detail of what they found. But the thing that genuinely unsettled the archaeologists was the position of the ship. It was upright, perfectly intact, completely undisturbed. The whole city of Boston had grown up directly above it. For over a century, people had been walking over this ship every single day, going to work, going home, living their lives with absolutely no idea a whole ship was sitting just a few feet below them. The desert eggs that cracked open. Something unsettling. Archaeologists digging through a buried campsite in Israel's Negev desert pulled up something they were not expecting. Several large oval objects were pressed into the sand, and as the soil was carefully cleared away, the team realized they were looking at ancient ostrich eggs, fully intact and sealed, estimated to be somewhere between 4,000 and 7,500 years old. Scattered nearby were tools, pottery fragments, and the blackened remains of an ancient fire pit. Researchers believe desert nomads had collected the eggs as a food source. One ostrich egg carries the same nutritional value as roughly 25 chicken eggs, enough to feed a small group for an entire day. Some of the eggs appeared to have been emptied out and used as water containers, sealed with resin and carried across the desert. Then one of the eggs cracked, not because anyone dropped it. The shell simply gave way on its own, as air reached it for the first time in thousands of years. Inside were the dried remains of the original contents, still partially there, dark and biological. The team went completely silent. What they were looking at had not been touched by air since before the pyramids were built. The secret tunnel that divided a community. Workers carrying out repairs beneath a synagogue in Brooklyn broke through a wall and found themselves looking into a narrow underground tunnel. It was low, roughly dug, and ran approximately 60 feet beneath the building. Nobody had any idea it was there. Authorities were called immediately. The decision was made to seal the tunnel, and that is when everything fell apart. Before the ceiling could be completed, a confrontation broke out inside the synagogue. A group of young men tore up the flooring and forced their way into the tunnel entrance to stop it from being closed. The images were filmed and spread across social media within hours, and suddenly the whole world was asking the same question. What was this tunnel actually for? The explanations that came out of the community kept changing. Some people claimed it was part of a planned expansion project that had been quietly approved. Others insisted it had been secretly dug over several months in the middle of the night by a group acting entirely on their own without any authorization from leadership. Investigators could not get a straight answer. The details shifted every time someone spoke. A tunnel secretly dug beneath a house of worship, with no consistent explanation, and a community that fractured completely the moment it was discovered. That is not something that happens by accident. The ancient inscription that linked two empires. Archaeologists excavating the ruins of Phanagoria, an ancient city sitting on the Black Sea coast, pulled a broken marble slab out of the ground. It was engraved with text. When language specialists examined it, they immediately noticed something that made no sense. The inscription was written in ancient Persian, a language with absolutely no reason to appear this far north, this far from where Persian civilization was centered. Then they translated it, and the room got very quiet. The text was a direct declaration from Darius Thirst, one of the most powerful kings in Persian history, announcing Persia's violent crushing of a Greek rebellion over 2,500 years ago. These kinds of slabs were not decorations. They were statements of dominance, placed inside cities that had been defeated, meant to remind everyone living there exactly who was in charge. Researchers believe this slab originally stood in a Greek city that joined the rebellion and was punished for it. At some point, centuries later, it was loaded onto a ship as heavy ballast and transported across the sea to Phanagoria, where it eventually sank into the earth and vanished from all record. One broken stone, buried in foreign soil, connected two of the ancient world's greatest powers and proved that Phanagoria was sitting right at the center of all of it. The hidden chamber beneath a gas station. When archaeologists descended beneath the old Coffee Citgo gas station in Newport, Rhode Island, they found themselves standing inside a circular stone chamber that measured roughly 10 feet across and 12 feet deep. The walls were hand-cut and carefully constructed. Whatever this was, someone had put serious effort into building it. At first glance, it looked like a well, but the more the team examined it, the more that explanation fell apart. The construction was far too deliberate, far too precise for something built just to collect water. Researchers believe the chamber may date back to 1639, which would make it one of the oldest surviving colonial structures anywhere in the United States. The leading theory is that it was originally built to access fresh water from an underground spring, a resource that would have been essential for one of the earliest European settlements on the East Coast. Researcher Nick Depa, who led the team descending into the structure, planned to photograph and document every inch of its interior. But then the team noticed the walls. Carved into the stone were deliberate markings, not decorative, not structural. The kind of marks that build up over time, left by people returning to the same place repeatedly in the dark for purposes that no written record has ever explained. This chamber was used regularly by people who kept coming back to it. And then at some point, it was sealed, buried beneath layers of fill and modern pavement, and forgotten for potentially 4 centuries until a gas station was built directly on top of it.